Okay, so Martin, now we've walked quite a way out to the most northern part of Leavesden Asylum.
Yep.
So we're standing at this derelict building now. Could you just kind of describe
where we are now, Russell, is we're at the very, very heart of the 42 acres they used to harvest to feed the 2,400 people that were here when it opened in the 1870s. What's behind us is the old farmer's cottage. Mr. Buchanan was the first farmer here, and he was paid 25 shillings a week plus the use of this two-bedroom house to harvest 42 acres to supply vegetables and fruit to the hospital. He also worked with about 64 patients, so they would help him harvest all this and everything. So this was his very first house, and then as we move on down the pathway, we'll start to get to different areas, the actual 42 acres, the 8 acres that they used to graze the cattle that fed milk to all the hospital, and the sewage treatment plant, and then on to the mysterious cemetery where we might have a mass burial.
Right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Russell, where we are right now is we're on the very, very north side of the park. This is where they had the cemetery. Now, back in the days in 1870, when they opened the first cemetery, it would have been right across the road here, and it would have been right next to what you can see as the caretaker's lodge or the gravedigger's lodge. Now, they only had that grave site in 1870. They only had that for about 16 years, and then they mysteriously asked for another 1,192 square yards so they could have another cemetery. Well, we come to find out during our investigations and everything, there was a bit of a problem with the watering system. What they ended up doing was accidentally poisoning themselves with cholera. So they pumped poisoned water up to the hospital, causing a cholera epidemic, and they actually needed to find a new place to put a mass grave because they had so many people that had passed away from this. This was about 1898. So we have the records over in Hertfordshire Historical Society. We have the records there. In 1905, the Diocese of St. Albans authorized the move of the cemetery and consecrated the ground that's right behind us. So this lich gate right here, although it says 1886, was actually across the road at the very second cemetery.
Yeah.
So that was there in 1886. Then they moved it across the road in 1905 when they opened up this cemetery. So it's very interesting that they would have had to have only had a cemetery for about 6 years and then suddenly move across the street. So let's go take a look inside this cemetery here.
Sure. Okay, Martin, now I come to the conclusion of our visit.
Yeah.
This is quite a significant place. Could you explain to me? I mean, it looks like it's overgrown, but this has a significant...
It is. That's a very significant place as far as the whole hospital goes, because it was the third cemetery that they did have here on site, and it was consecrated in 1905. And this is where, if you were a staff member in good standing here at the hospital, you had a free place for burial, you know, after you've done your 35 years and everything. And you were buried alongside the road. You can see the 3 stations or 4 stations of the cross, you know, up here. So it's your typical cemetery setup. We have a memorial stone that was laid here when they opened the cemetery in 1905, and it says basically, remember to God all those who were buried here and whose names are recorded in the Book of Remembrance at Leavesden Hospital Chapel. Unfortunately, we've never been able to find that original Book of Remembrance. We're still looking for it. There's a lot of people who have relatives that are here, and we're working now on trying to get all the names collected and everything, so we have a record of it. It is overgrown. It isn't properly being taken care of. You know, we are trying to do some things with it, getting the local district council to take responsibility for this area and just not let it go to waste, because it is a very memorable place. We still have people that contact us from all over the world with relatives that may be here. They're doing you know, a genealogy research, and they want to know if their great-grandmother is here or not. So we're trying to help with that, and so we're going to be working to put some names together and really, you know, try and find out who's here and make a record of their last resting place. So it's going to be quite an adventure.
Okay.
This would have been the cemetery for both staff and patients. The only thing is if you were staff and you had enough money, relatives had enough money to buy you a headstone or whatever, you'd be closer to the main road here. If it was a pauper grave, you would have been farther away, so you would have been back there towards the edges and everything, where you see a lot of the open grave sites that have collapsed over time, because back in the days of the 1870s, 1860s, it was very common to bury people 8 deep, especially if it was a pauper's grave. So that's what they did around here. That's why we unfortunately have a lot of the collapsing graves and everything, and no record of actually who's there, because they couldn't afford headstones and everything. So that's why we're trying to look for some paper records, either through the current NHS record system or with private collectors and everything. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
So we know that Aaron Kosminski was taken
Yes.
by his brother Wolf to East Ham Cemetery. Where we're standing here, you're telling me that this is the staff graveyard, but also the inmates, or say patients, or even residents, or even service users' graveyard. We can see here a wooden headstone.
Right. So this would be Eliza Weeks. She's one of the noted ones. Now, this is a wooden headstone that we had. Now, Eliza worked for the hospital over 30 years. She passed away in 1917 at the age of 62. So she would have had an honored place here for having so much service with the hospital, as everybody did. So this is just an example of how they used to take care of everybody if you did long service. You got the gold watch, you know, and a free place to be buried. So.
Thank you. Now, also, as I've noticed, we've walked around, we can see that certain pockets or dates are all around the same time. So if Aaron Kosminski wasn't taken from, his body wasn't taken from Leavesden Asylum by his brother Wolf, he may have been buried in this section, you say?
That's right. If Aaron Kosminski was actually left here and he had not been taken away, because of the way they would have organized everybody in the same times, you know, passing away in the same years or close to or whatever, it's a good likelihood that Aaron Kosminski would have been buried right over in the northwest corner over there in the pauper section.
In the pauper section. So the one thing I'd like to ask you is about the cholera epidemic.
Right.
And could you explain to me about where they buried the bodies there?
Right. What happened was we had a rumor, there was a history, a story being told of a mass grave somewhere, and as I started doing some research about 2 years ago, I was in the archives up in Hertfordshire County, and the first cemetery that we had was actually across the street from this one, and that was the first one they had in 1870. Then only about 16 years later, they requested an additional 1,192 square yards of cemetery space from the farm. Well, that's kind of odd, because you wouldn't have filled up a cemetery in 17 years just with the normal rate, you know, especially if they were burying everybody 8 deep. You would have had a lot of room for many years. So what we found out during the records was also during that time they requested money for the investigation of the water system. They also wanted to investigate a fever outbreak. Now, if you put that all together, they requested more space. They didn't really fill the space that they had in the first, you know, instance when they first opened the hospital. They were investigating the water, and they were investigating a fever outbreak. Then all of a sudden, they have 6 years later, they move all the way from that, and now they're across the street where we are here in 1905 in the new cemetery. So if you put that all together, that's a pretty good explanation for where the mass grave might be. We don't know how many people are there, we don't know how many people really died, but it is the one area in all of the park, in all of this site now, that is restricted as far as access to. No one's allowed to go in there, you're not allowed to develop it, you're not allowed to sell it, you can't do anything with that land. So there's restrictions on the land. You know, the time frame just shows that something happened and they had to move away from that quite quick. So I think that pretty much solves the mystery of where the mass grave is.
Mr. Martin, thank you ever so much
pleasure.
for your time. Thank you.
Thanks.